we able to talk right now?
Right. And there we go. Launching another episode of The Kinetic. My name is Sam Matero. I'm your host and producer of The Kinetic, Faith in Motion. And let me kill this audio that's running in the background here. I'm so excited about the show tonight because, well, of course, what are we going to be talking about? We're going to be talking about what we always talk about here, which is faith in motion, healing from and recovering from addiction issues, I should say, through activation and sustaining in the power of our God and the power of Christ in us, in our families, in our communities, and we utilize every opportunity that we can here to get on here and to help people share their stories of how they came to healing, came to redemption, how God worked in their lives. On a regular basis, we bring pastors on to do some teaching. Well, tonight we're going to try something right up my alley. I'm very, very, very excited to bring on our first professional musician and a wonderful, wonderful success story. Not just in terms of battling addiction, and but also in terms of a successful small business model, a successful young man who has launched a successful contemporary Christian rock band and fused this with his ministry as he goes out traveling through the country telling his incredible story of how he came through the fire of addiction, came to God, healed, and is now utilizing this story and his music to touch the lives of people all over the internet, all over this country, in person. I am absolutely honored and thrilled to bring on to the show tonight Mr. Allan Scott from Allan Scott Band. And you can check out Allan at allanscottmusic.com. We'll talk more about that in a second. So without further ado, let's go ahead and I'm going to bring up the show with just a touch of his music here.
In the valley of the shadow, I will not fear. If enemies surround me, I know you are near. You're bigger than all I can see. You are holding on to me. If night comes a little closer, you'll light my way. When the road's a little longer, you'll give me strength. I hear you singing victory songs over every path I'm on. I wanna live fearless. I believe, I believe, I believe, I believe. You promised I believe, I believe, I believe. You are for me.
Nice. There we got him. Let's go ahead and bring Allan Scott into the Kinetic. Allan Scott, welcome to the show, my brother. I'm so glad we finally made this happen, man. Let me pause this YouTube video. Hold on. I have this playing on another machine. Hold on. There we go. And we'll pause that stinger that's ringing in the background. Allan Scott, welcome to the Kinetic. Thank you so much for making time out of your very busy schedule to come on here and share your powerful testimonial with our audience.
Hey, thanks for having me, Sam. I appreciate it, man. Looking forward to
Absolutely.
it.
So, well, man, we got quite a bit to talk about here. Why don't we just talk with, tell us a little bit about Allan Scott growing up, you as a person. Then we'll get into your trials, your struggles, what you've been through, how you overcame those trials and struggles. We'll discuss your ministry and, of course, your music. Tell us about Allan Scott. Allan, where did you grow up, and tell us about what it was like growing up, Allan Scott.
Well, I was born in Bremerton, Washington, which is it's a naval base right outside of Seattle, and I remember I lived super close to the airport, the military airport, and I would see these huge planes fly over. But when I was about 4 years old, my family moved to Pennsylvania, which I like to call Pennsyltucky. And if you've ever been in the South, you'd understand that Pennsylvania is just like a southern state. We don't have any sweet tea, but we love our football. And but I moved here when I was 4 years old, and I have lived. I'm 39 now, so I've lived here ever since. Moved to Bellefonte, Pennsylvania when I was 4 years old. And now my family, we live in Pleasant Gap. So, and I'm married, and I have a 3-year-old daughter that is very energetic.
As they can be at that age.
Yeah, she keeps us going, man.
So, Allan, I was reading in your bio, which you don't hold back. I mean, you're sharing your story in great detail. Out when you're out on the road, in person, but also on your website at allanscottmusic.com. Your difficulties as a person started, as you put up on your website, dealing with a rather rough upbringing in an abusive environment. And dare I say, a lot of people that are dealing with addiction issues started out life in the same way. Tell us what it was like growing up in your house and what kind of challenges you had to face.
Well, right out of the gate, the environment that I grew up in was dysfunctional. My mom loved the Lord, but I just remember there was a lot of fighting at home, and the guy that actually raised me for the first 8 years wasn't my father. I didn't find that out till I was a little bit older. But I just remember a lot of fighting, and whenever I was 4 years old, like I said, we moved to Pennsylvania. And my parents, they eventually split up. My mom got a divorce, and I remember that there was just that whole season was just really choppy. And I remember when I was young, when I was probably about 8 years old, I remember that I remember feeling I was always trying to get the approval of other people, and I just felt like I just remember that feeling really strong when I was younger. And I just felt like rejected. And when I was from about 8 to 12, though, there were some good years in my childhood. My mom was raising us as a single mom, and she was doing, she did everything she could to try to put us in a godly environment. And it was around that time that my younger brother got a guitar as a gift, as a present, and I took it away from him because I was bigger at the time, and although now he's a lot bigger than I am, but I remember I used to play that guitar for hours a day over the summer, and I loved playing. And I remember I would just make up these. I didn't know how to play chords, so I would just hit the strings, but I would sing like songs over top, and
like playing bass on a guitar.
That's right, yeah. And I would walk around like the supermarket that was close to where I lived, and walk around the sidewalk, and I was playing. I sounded horrible, but I just loved it. And when I was 12 years old. There's like kind of another tough marriage that happened, and that was bad right out of the gate. A lot of just fighting, and but I had already started.
Second marriage.
It was a second marriage, yeah.
Oh wow!
And I had already started running. I started running from God at that point when I was about 11 or 12 years old, and I started getting involved in drug and alcohol stuff right then, right around 12, and I eventually, I was in a private school. My mom busted her tail, put my brother and I in a Christian school, and she probably did it with grants because she didn't make a lot of money as a single mom, but she tried to put us in that environment. But I was starting to run, and I eventually got expelled, kicked out of that school for drug use and some stuff that I was doing. Eventually went to the public school system, and by the time I was 12 years old, or not 12, by the time I was 17, I dropped out of high school, and I was in my first drug and alcohol rehab. And
wow.
My younger brother, he was about 2.5 years old.
At 17 years old?
Yeah, I was 17. Yep, I was 17, and
Now, can I ask you? You're in a role here, and I don't want to interrupt you, but I want to put this. I was reading on your bio, man. You dealt with some serious drugs there for a little
yeah,
while after this point.
I did.
How did it start? What were you into in high school that got you busted and got you kicked out and got you into rehab?
Well, I started smoking weed. When I was really young. When I probably right around there, 12 years old or so. But then right away, the very next thing I did was LSD,
Oh,
and
wow.
that was even when I was when I was in my private school, and then I became a trash can. So I would put whatever I could into my body, whether it was cocaine or acid or I drank a lot, a little bit of everything. By the time I dropped out of high school, I was really I the only thing I didn't like was heroin, and because I just didn't like downers. But I was into cocaine um,
Wow. So you
and
tried heroin that early age?
yeah, I did try it.
My
I
goodness.
never shot it, but I did. I definitely snorted it,
Mhm.
and it was yeah, I tried it. I was at Special K, ketamine, ecstasy. I was just kind of a trash can. I was just trying to change the way that I felt, and I was just always I was always chasing kind of like that adrenaline type rush. And um, but yeah, so I was 17 was when I went to rehab. My brother actually went into rehab at the same time. I had gotten him involved in. He had just kind of watched my life, and I think he thought what I was doing was pretty cool.
Younger brother
Um,
then?
yeah, I was a younger brother. Yep, and so we were both in rehab, and the guy my mom was married to was taken out of the house in handcuffs for a domestic thing that got pretty bad. And so, but when I was in that rehab, I was not ready to change. I was still running from God, and so I just wasn't ready to change. So I got out of that rehab, and I remember I told myself that I have this under control, and so what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop with the drug use, and I'm going to I'll just drink. And so that didn't last for very long. Um, I Pretty soon I was into everything worse than I had been before, and I uh, eventually I think I was about 18 years old. I had stolen a bunch of drugs and money from a drug dealer, and we took a car, me and another guy, and we drove down to Pittsburgh, and we sold the drugs, and took all the money that we had and hopped on an Amtrak train down to Dallas. And when I got to Dallas,
Wow.
we locked ourselves into a hotel room and just basically began using crystal meth until we ran out of money.
Now,
And that,
was that your first experimenting with meth? Because I know
well,
that's
I
a
had
huge problem up here in central Pennsylvania.
yeah, it was. I had meth before, but it was the first time I really started to dive into it,
Right.
and we would smoke it, and and yeah, it was just like I things hit a low point really quick. Eventually, I ran out of money, and
Hmm. So
I
you
was
burned
just a
through
loser.
the drug money you guys stole.
Yeah, yeah, and I was a thief. I was the kind of guy that would take your stuff and then turn around and help you look for it. You know what I mean?
Mm,
I was a low life, and
wow. Now,
and
what age was that when you were down there?
I was 18, between
Wow.
18,
So just
18
a
and
kid
19
to
years old.
boot in a
Yeah,
big city
that
like
was
that, man.
yeah, it was an interesting time. I just when I left town, I just kind of left in the middle of the night and didn't let anyone know where I was going, and kind of reconnected with people after that, but they were surprised, to say at least. I was just making bad choices,
Yeah.
and So I lived in Texas for not too long, just a little while, maybe 3 or 4 months. And but the guys that I'd stolen from had come looking for me. They'd hurt some of my friends, and I remember I moved back to Pennsylvania eventually, and I still wasn't ready to change. I wasn't ready to let God come into the situation at all, and so I decided I would try to clean myself up, and I was going to do that by going to Penn State, and so I went to I started going to school, and that didn't last for long. I thought it'd be a good idea if I joined a fraternity. I don't know. It's not exactly a get your life back together plan, but
Yeah.
but that didn't last long. Before long, I dropped out of college. Been kicked out of my
Did
fraternity.
you fall into party and then with the frat boys?
Yeah, and then
Yeah.
eventually, I got, they didn't want anything to do with me, and I was kicked out of that eventually. And I always had the police looking for me,
Hmm.
and I had people that I'd stolen from looking for me, and yeah, I was just a loser, a liar, and a thief, and I was always, stealing was really, it wasn't something that I did occasionally. I mean, I did it every day. I stole from my family, my friends, people I didn't know, and I was always lying. I lied about everything, trying to cover up I would lie and then tell lies to cover up the lies that I had told. And
I've heard this a lot from people
yeah,
that have been in that position, and I'm wondering about the habitual lying of the habitual lying, of course, to cover up, to cover up, to cover up. The stealing, was that habitual, or was that something that you were stealing for the purpose of money, or was it another kind of addiction that you were dealing with to try to fill
it,
some kind of void in your life? What was the
yeah,
motivation
it was an
for the
addiction for
thievery?
sure. I mean, we used
Really
to, yeah, we used
interesting.
to. I used to break into cars and steal from people from their houses and
Hmm.
just I would steal. I would anything any from any person, whether it was my family or just something as easy and simple as stealing from my stealing money from their wallet to breaking into cars and stealing stuff from there, or it was just friends taking stuff from friends. It was just a nonstop sort of thing. And then the lying
Wow.
was very habitual, but I think I wasn't necessarily thrill seeking, um, but I didn't feel good about myself, and so I would lie about who I was, where I came from, um, and then there was that side of it, which was just purely trying to prop myself up and build myself up. But then there was this other side of it where I had to tell lies to cover up the lies that I told, and
Mm.
that was kind of a cycle. And so when you combine the lying, the stealing, uh, and constant drug use, and I was caught in a cycle that I couldn't get out of. Um,
Wow.
I I had tried. I would try to clean myself up. I would try to do these things. Uh, try to get in shape, whatever I could to try to have control over the situation. But I kept doing the same things over and over. And I eventually got to this point, and I was always running from the police. The police were looking for me. I had lots of warrants out for my arrest. Um, and it got to this point where I was running from people. I was running from my friends, people I had stolen from. The drug dealers. I was always looking over my shoulder, and I was running from the police. And so I was living in this world that had gotten very small, and it was just a world where I constantly had to be watching out for people and watching out for myself, the lying thing. And I eventually, and I sold, I'd been really into music when I was in high school. Even through the drug use, I was still into music. But over time, I had sold any kind of like music equipment that I had to pay for my lifestyle. And so I got to this point where I realized that I was going to be a loser, a liar, and a thief for the rest of my life. That I wasn't going to be able to change. And I lived in that way. I lived that way for a while.
How
And
did
but I still, well, I wasn't
describe
serving
that
God.
point? This
What'd you say?
this describe that point. You said, I got to this point where I realized who you had become. Describe that moment in time for us. How did that realization happen? Was it an epiphany? Was it a gradual realization?
Well, I think for me, it was something that it happened over time. It wasn't like I had this moment and all of a sudden I was like,
are you there? Hello? We lost our guest. Let me go ahead and pull this up. I saw a message pop up that said his internet connection became unstable. So Allan is joining us via webcam, as you can see. And let's see. Here he comes. There he is. He's back. Hold on. Allan, hold on. Hold on, buddy. Hold on, man.
Other stuff.
Hey, Allan.
Yes.
Hold that thought. For some reason, we dropped you.
Okay.
The internet connection, we had a message that popped up and said, your internet connection has become unstable.
Okay.
And then you disappeared.
Okay.
So I just talked for a moment here, and then you popped back up. So, if you would, we left off with where you were describing us that aha moment where you come to realize who you had not who you'd become, but who you were electing to act like in your life. You said before we lost you, you said it was sort of a gradual progression. So if you would pick back up from there, please.
Yeah, so it was just kind of the snowball effect where I just realized that over time that I was what I did, and what I did was constantly steal and lie. And I remember that I hit this low point, and I was drunk. I was on some other things. I was just a trash can. I was always looking for the next high. So like one high wasn't good enough. So I was drunk. I was inebriated, and I was over at this friend's house, and I remember I was in the basement, and remember I hit my knees on these basement steps, and I said, God, I need you to help me. And then, I just got up, and I forgot that prayer, and I walked away. And I totally was not paying attention. I didn't think anything of the prayer. But I learned that I learned something that day. I learned that God has a great memory, much better memory than I do. And because a couple months later, I learned that Jesus also likes to work with the local law enforcement. And Jesus and the police came and put me in jail. I finally was caught, went to jail. And I remember that it was probably my third week in jail. It was about 19 days. And I remember that I had basically I'd been arrested. I was in this jail cell, and I remember the fog, like this drug fog that I was in. Sorry, my daughter's screaming in the background. You can't hear that.
Okay.
But
I was just
really
looking. We had some comments of some people in the room had noticed when you dropped out.
Yeah. It's okay. She's not being
back.
abused. She just doesn't like bath time, probably. But
she's 3.
But
she's boisterous.
I remember 3 weeks into this, fog began to lift. And I remember thinking, I said, I wonder if God is doing for me, if this is Him working in my life, giving me an opportunity to change. And so I just began to do whatever I could in that jail cell, and I would read my Bible, and because I just my mom had put that faith in me when I was younger. And so I knew who to run to, or who was going to come running after me eventually. And so I would read my Bible. And also right away, I started having songs. I would hear songs when I was in my prison cell. And they would let us out for rec for a couple hours a day. And so I would get out and I would hear these songs, and I would have these lyrics. Take a van of us guys to his church, and I remember this one Sunday, God just began to speak to me, and I just remember staying after the service, and I stayed there probably for 30 or 40 minutes. I just remember crying as I just felt like I was getting a touch from God in some way. And so I was in that rehab for a while, and eventually I got out of rehab, and I knew that I had some decisions that I had to make. And they told us when we were in rehab that second time that that there was going to be a very low rate of us that actually made it, and that probably within a short period of time, 2 of us were going to be dead. And so I got out of rehab with a bunch of guys. Some came back to my hometown of State College, which is, by the way, where Penn State is. If some people don't know where that is, but right in the center of Pennsylvania. And eventually all the friends that I had I had a decision. I had to get plugged in. And so I made a decision to get plugged in to some support groups. And I, but it wasn't long before one of my friends from rehab, his name was Wes, he had died. And all the other guys that I'd come out of rehab with had just kind of fallen off and gone back out into addiction. But so it kind of made me even more like eager to want to keep moving in the right direction. And I really think it was God, his grace just in me that was just pushing me and helping me to keep moving. And eventually I got plugged into a church. And the thing that got me plugged into the church was the fact that they let me onto the worship team. And being on the worship team meant I was there on Tuesday night, meant that I was there on Wednesday night. Sometimes I was there on Friday, and then I was there on Sunday. So it was like all the time.
It became your life.
Yeah, it became my life,
right.
But it was a lifeline for me. And
Absolutely.
I found out that one of my good friends now had actually gone to the pastor. He's kind of like a father figure for me, and basically asked him to let me onto the worship team just so I could stay plugged in. But it wasn't because I was very good. But yeah, so God began to put my life back together. And so, I'd been clean for about 2 or 3 years. And I remember that I was at like a recovery kind of place meeting. And I saw this girl, and I saw her across the room, and I said, she is hot, and I'm going to stay away from her. And that ended up being my wife. We dated for a couple years. She started coming to my church first. She came to my church, and then it was the first time that I was with her. The second time, my mom led her.
I got to stop you. I can't let that go.
Yeah.
Why
Yeah.
She's hot, but I'm going to stay away from her.
Well, when I met her, I had been clean for just over a year, and it's like pretty recommended that you stay out of relationships at least for the first year, just because you're getting the cement is still wet, and you're really rebuilding a life, and you're hopefully doing some work, trying to make amends with people that
Sure.
you've wronged. And I actually watched a lot of people get kind of pulled back into addiction through relationships, two kind of unhealthy people getting together and
Right.
trying to make one healthy relationship. And so I just that was kind of my instinct, was to try to just be careful. And but as we got to spend a little time together, and my mom, she came out to see me play once, my band. This is a long time ago, and we were at a coffee shop, and she came out to see us play, and my mom led her to the Lord in the back of the room, and then she started coming to church.
Okay.
And after that, we started dating. It was a couple months, over a couple months, and our friendship was growing. And but she was an ex-cocaine addict, and
wow.
And so, and had actually been clean and sober for like a year longer than me. And so God began to put our lives together. We got married in 2006, and you know, before I came to the Lord, I had done pretty much everything wrong. You know, had been very promiscuous and just living that whole life. But my wife and I, we were able to do things the right way, and I think that's important. I think that's getting lost a little bit in even with young Christians, not you know, not keeping their marriage or their relationship pure before they get married. I think that's important. And we were able to do that just by having people around us and you know, being able to rely on them. And but I think God now God can restore any situation, and I guess I'm an example of that because I did everything the wrong way, but He just helped us do things the right way. And we got married, and so it was 7 years ago was the last time that I had any drug in my system or any alcohol. And my wife and I, we've been married for 13 years in June, and God just began to bless us and put our lives together, not because of like anything good that I had done, because when God found me, I was a loser and I was a thief. But he began to put my life together because He's good and He loves us. And it was all because of His goodness and all because of His grace. And so I had thrown that dream away I had of playing music, and but as I continued to walk with God and just you know, do the things that were in front of me, I had the desire to play again. And so I played on my church worship team for a while, and then eventually I formed a little band from that place, and we were kind of a hard rock band, and very different from what I do now, but we would travel to like little things here and there and festivals, and I was working in banking actually for a long time, until 2016, and kind of had worked my way up into different positions, but in 2016, you know, it's so funny because there are dreams and things that God has put in our hearts to do, and sometimes when we think that it's impossible, God is always able to turn a situation around. He's able to make a way. And in you know, over the years, I just kept trying to grow and get better at what I was doing. And then in 2016, God made a way for me to begin doing the music thing full time. And
how'd that happen?
Well, I had so I was in a bank. I worked in a couple different lending places, and I was working for a bank that was based out of Philly. And over 14 years, I think, or 13 years, maybe 12 years. I can't remember the timeline, but I worked up to a position in the bank where I was an underwriter. So basically, I was a guy that would make lending decisions about who the bank was going to give money to, and so I got a call from my boss. I worked for him for 8 years, had a lot of job security, but I got a call and he said, "Allan, you know, we're our bank, you know, we're switching bank affiliations. I got to get you rehired at the new bank because I had some lending authority, so they had to. It was kind of a position where they had to vet me out and do all that sort of thing. So, sure. But I'd had a dream a couple months before this, and I don't remember anything that was in the dream, but I remember when I woke up, I had this sense that there was like a new thing was coming, a new season. And I didn't know what it was, but I remember I couldn't shake the feeling, even though I couldn't remember the dream. So after a couple months, it was a couple days. After a couple days, I told my wife, I said, "I think something's coming." And so it was about 2 months later, I think this is in September or October, that I had this dream. Well, in November, I got this phone call. And right away, I felt like God was saying, "This is the change that I'm going to bring." And so what happened was the process of getting me rehired on kept taking longer and longer. And so I applied for other jobs, and I was given, I could have gone back into the field, but I really felt God say, "No, I'm leading you in a new direction." And so I didn't go back, and I made a decision to leave that. kind of fly by the seat of my pants and step out into the, I'd already been working. I had my ministry kind of working in tandem at the same time with the job. I was traveling on the weekends and working, my desk job during the week. But so it was that, God just opened up that door, and that year in 2016, the size of our ministry tripled in size. And I didn't do anything different. It was just God would just, he just kind of said, this is what we're going to do now.
It finally caught fire. Right.
Yeah. I wasn't fired.
I said it went from a small flame to catching fire and igniting. I said it finally caught fire.
It grew. It grew pretty fast. Yeah. And
now, how far were you traveling at that point, Allan?
Well, we were traveling. We had traveled to different parts of the country at that point. We had been to different. We had been probably as far away as Alabama, maybe, or is it Alabama? Alabama is a coastal state, so I think we were at a festival in Alabama. We had done some stuff in Tennessee, but mostly we were and some different places. Mostly we were in the Northeast, which was Pennsylvania, New Jersey, Delaware, and then Ohio and New York.
And what types of venues or events were you playing, and how were you managing the business of this? I mean, you were a young man pulling out of a lot, juggling your career. What did the mechanics of that look, of your organization, of your group, of your ministry look like at that time?
Well, I had God had really set up even the job that I had to be. So when I got the job in bank, this particular job, I had worked in banking before that, but God really provided a way for me to kind of be bivocational. And basically, the guy that was running the branch or the division of the bank that I was working for, he was a musician himself. And was in a band, and they did, he was making albums, and so he kind of understood the whole thing. But what happened over time was I was able to cut my hours back farther and farther, working for the bank. The nature of my position was that I could work remote, and so God had really just provided a way for me to be able to kind of wear a couple hats. But it was hard. It was really hard. I would work maybe 30 or 35 hours a week, and then I would work another 20 or 30 hours, or maybe sometimes more on the ministry, not including the time that I would be traveling, and working a lot of late hours in the night, it eventually, at the point where God made a way for me to be in the full-time ministry that I'm in, I had actually gotten to this point where I didn't understand how I could do both things at the same time, because the ministry was growing and the demands of my job were also growing at the same time. And so it was a tricky thing, but God knew, he knew what I needed. And, but the where the ministry was at the time, I have a band. So I travel with I was at the time traveling with 4 guys. And so I was managing that, and managing everything else that goes along with being an independent musician. If you're releasing music, you're doing that on your own, and websites, and and then all the financial aspects of it. So that was kind of where I was at when I transitioned. But God, God he knows what we need. It probably wasn't as soon as I wanted it to be, but it was as soon, it was as late enough as I needed it to be, because I felt like the time that I spent working for, and God is, he's always preparing us for the next thing. And so the time that I was working for, this bank and the guy that I was working for, I really grew in my ability to manage. And I was managing a little team, and I was managing the entire loan production for the bank, for the branch of the bank that I was at. And so I really got a lot better at multitasking, wearing multiple hats, all the things that I have to do now.
Understanding money, financial
Understanding
matters.
money, yeah.
Yeah, isn't that interesting? So he was preparing you where
Yeah,
you were to
right.
be able to receive the full blessing that he clearly had in store for you. And when the time was right and you were
Yep.
ready to be able to manage a little, he gave you a lot.
Yeah, and God must have had more work, a lot of work to do on me, because it wasn't until I was about 35 or 36 until he opened that door. So he had to age me like an old piece of meat for a while.
There you
Probably
go. Yeah,
character
something.
things and just a whole bunch of stuff. But I think God, his timing is just perfect. And but I spent a lot of years asking God when.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and but it's funny, every time I go through a transition like this, the older I get, the more I can see that that he's faithful. And so it causes me to stress out about things a little bit less. I still
Mm-hmm.
stress out about things. My personality is just kind of built like that. But I just seeing his faithfulness, really, in past years, and how he does things, can kind of really takes the edge off, and just kind of, we're all in a process. And
Right.
so yeah, so that's how I kind of got to, when I kind of started the full time thing. And the thing I always like to say, so now we travel all over the country, and and nothing has ever been fast for me. It's never happened fast for me. It's just been like a slow kind of progression of where God's building things and
Mm-hmm.
wants me to walk through different things and learn things. But I'd like to say this now. I am by the world standards, I'm a loser, a liar, and a thief. That's my past, a drug addict. But today I get to travel all over the country and share my story. And I am not really qualified by the world standards to do any of that. I don't have a college degree. I dropped out of high school. All the wrong things on my resume. I know the right things on my resume. And if God can use my life, if God can use someone like me, God can use anybody. And there's no mountain that's too big for him. There's no bad decision, and there's no failure. There's no sickness. There's nothing that is bigger than God. And he's always faithful. And I just like to encourage people that, no matter what you're facing, no matter what you're going through, what you see in front of you, God is bigger than that thing. And God can make any story a comeback story. And then also, God sees you. He sees where you're at. He is intimately involved in details of your life. He loves you, and he's a God that is going to work the way out perfectly. And all he wants us to do is just trust him. And even if we do that imperfectly, it says that he is faithful when we are faithless, because he can't deny himself. That means he can't stop being faithful. He's always faithful. And so, I just want that. Hopefully that'll encourage somebody, someone who's been waiting for a long time, or someone who feels like, their past is disqualifying them from a future. The truth is that God was never looking to us to qualify ourselves for anything. On the basis of our performance, on the basis of our ability, we're all disqualified. But see, that's the beauty, is that Jesus came and he qualified us. He made us clean and close to God. That's what it says in 2 Corinthians 5:21.
That we
he took all of
are
our sin.
the
Yeah,
righteousness
that's
of
my
God
favorite
with
verse.
him
He took all of our sin and gave us
in
credit for
us.
his perfect obedience. So when
Absolutely.
God sees us, he sees the beauty and the perfection of Jesus. And he loves us just like he loves his son. And so there's nothing that God can't do. And I hope that encourages somebody.
Outstanding. Allan, when you're out there on your road, you're talking with people, you are engaged in your ministry mode. What would you say is your your core central point that you're hammering out there?
Yeah. Well, the biggest thing is that there's two things. One is what I kind of said which is that no matter what addiction or no matter what, God can set you free, and He wants to use your life, and He'll take your life to where He has a plan, and God, don't disqualify yourself in your own mind from what God could do in your life. God is able, and He's willing. That's the other thing, is He's willing. He's not looking at you and saying, yeah, I could do it, but I'm not gonna because you're not good enough.
Right.
Jesus was good enough, and that's all we need. And that's one thing. The other thing that I always point back to is the message of the gospel. And this is one of the most powerful things. I think that I think this is the point of the Bible. The point of the Bible is that, like, in my Christian life, I walked around after maybe 8 years or so of being a Christian and kind of being in leadership roles and traveling a little bit. And I was positive that God was only being good to me when I was good enough. And so what that would look like would be, I would get up to lead worship, and whenever I was confident He was going to use me, that I could minister whenever I didn't have any sin in my life, whenever I was giving enough money, whenever I was praying and hard enough and fasting, that's when He could use me. But if I messed up or I did something, God was in a swivel chair, and He was going to swivel away from me. And then after I felt bad for long enough, He was going to turn around and He was going to talk with me again.
May I ask you? Obviously, you've put a lot of time and study and prayer and have evolved past that mindset. Looking back in hindsight, we see this a lot in the Christian church, that mindset that we have to be good enough and we have to do in order for God to do. First I do, then God will do for me.
Right.
For you, where do you think that mindset came from?
Well, that just can't. I think that's the mode of operation for a lot of the church, a lot of teaching, a lot of believers. But there's also this inherent thing inside of us that, we live in a world where we are, what we receive is directly tied to what we do. And so God's mode of operation is counterintuitive to the world we live in. See, in the world I do and I get. But see, God, the gospel is, no, Jesus did and we get. God is He is the first, He takes the first action. And, there's this whole idea of sowing and reaping, but the truth of the gospel is that Jesus sowed, and so we reap. And I remember before I understood that I was living on this roller coaster. Now I call it bipolar Christianity, but it was just like I was up and I was down. I was up and I was down. And but when I really began to understand that Jesus took on the cross, He took every sin, every failing that I would ever commit. Now, I used to think that Jesus only took my past sins and my past failings. But the reality is all of my sinning was in the future when Jesus died for me. So if Jesus didn't die for my future sins, He didn't die for any of my sins at all. And it says in Hebrews 10:14, it says, for by His one sacrifice, He has forever cleansed or made perfect those who God has called out. Basically, those who believed on Jesus. And, there's these really, I love the book of Hebrews, but there's this really cool kind of picture in the book of Hebrews. And this picture is in the Old Testament, kind of like the old way that things were done. They would sacrifice animals, and they would sacrifice animals to pay for people's sinning, pay for sins. But the problem was the sacrifices never really took away the sins of the people. So they always felt guilty for their sins.
They didn't do enough.
And it says sacrifices had to keep being offered over and over again because the people kept sinning. Well, then it goes on and it says that Jesus offered himself one time as a sacrifice. Now, why did Jesus offer himself as one sacrifice? It's because his blood took away all of our sins forever, perfectly. And then it says that Jesus, this is the other cool thing it says in Hebrews, and it just blows my mind. In the temple, there was high priests, and the high priests were like the mediator between God and the people. They would kind of be like the ambassador to God. Mm-hmm. It says there was no chair, there was no seat in the temple. So the priest could never sit down because his job was never done offering sacrifices for the people because they never took away their sins. But it says that Jesus, who's called our high priest in the Bible, it says when he offered his sacrifice one time, it says that he sat down. Now, Jesus sat down for two reasons. One, it was because he was tired, and I don't think he was tired. The other reason that he would have sat down is because he was finished. And Jesus was finished. He said it right on the cross. And what he was finished doing was making us clean and holy and pure. And his sacrifice forever took away our sin. So when we are in our walk with God, a lot of times I used to just be conscious of my failures, of my sinning, of all the things that I was getting wrong. But see, the gospel was never meant to do that. The gospel was meant to take the focus of our eyes off of us and to put them onto Jesus. And as long as we're focused on our lack of ability, of our failing, we'll never really see rest. We'll never see victory in our life because we can't do it. But when our eyes are on Jesus and his success and that he cleansed us, we behave, we do what we believe. And if we walk around believing that we're a loser, that we're a sinner, well, that's how we're going to act. But if we look at the cross and we look at what Jesus did and we say, no, Jesus died and he made me clean and he made me holy and he made me a saint, well, that's how we're going to act. And the truth is that we are citizens of heaven. And as we believe that truth, as we begin to understand and believe what Jesus did, then our behavior begins to change. But for so long, I was trying to change my behavior to get God's approval. But I didn't realize that it's the other way around. He gives his approval, and that begins to change our behavior. And I love that passage where Jesus was talking to the woman that had been caught in prostitution. And what Jesus didn't say to her was, stop sinning, and then I won't condemn you. He said, first thing he did was gave her the gift of no condemnation. He said, woman, he said, look around. Where are the people that would condemn you? And she looked around, and there was no one. And he said, neither do I condemn you. He gave her the gift of right standing with him first. And she received that. And then he said, go and sin no more. And I think a lot of times we have it backwards. So that's a real long version of kind of like the heartbeat of the ministry that I have, is sharing the two things, that God is able no matter what, and that Jesus loves you and he's cleansed you. And so you can have confidence when you in your walk with God. So that's kind of the two main points that we like to talk about at our ministry events.
Let's delve into the mystery of this. One of the recurring themes that I hear on this show over and over and over, and in conversing with other Christians who have had a dramatic transformation, shall we say, that, and we heard this in your discussion, I felt that God was telling me, ... right?
Yeah.
The very personal nature, and I can attest to this. My story I've shared, I've told you a bit of mine, Allan, but I've shared this quite liberally out there on Facebook. I haven't held back anything. But one thing that I'm noticing is the unique ways that God does, and I put up the air quotes here, speak to us. Some people experience these coincidences or synchronicities that are aligned with certain people or circumstances and drawing back to Scripture. Other people, they have a dream. The dream that God comes to them in dreams and reveals through visions. So, a musician speaking through song, you know? I would like for you to touch on this a little bit. Some of the ways that God has spoken to you, and for anybody that's out there that's listening, that is sitting, that has that desire, that wants to come to God, know God, but they're looking and they're looking and they're looking and they're looking and they're searching and they're searching and they're searching. They're going, what is this guy talking about? I would give anything to have God speak to me. So solidify that with, give them some advice on how to turn that spigot up and how to listen. How do you know? How did you know when God was speaking to you?
Well, a lot of times I didn't know until after he had already spoken to me. And I remember there was a guy that told me once, I remember I was just praying so hard and trying to figure some things out in my life. And he said, Allan, if there's a God, his ability to speak to you is much greater than your ability to miss him. And so I've never heard God in an audible voice say anything to me. But what I have seen has been the ways that he's spoken to me is one, circumstantially, where like you mentioned, where he'll kind of show me a series of events and then I can see that he was involved. Another way is, kind of like through that dream that I had mentioned. I don't have a lot of dreams like that, but that was just, he felt that I needed to have that. And, but the greatest way that God speaks to us, to me, is that I will get an impression about something. And a lot of times, like I'll just, it says that God takes our old heart out when we put our faith in him and he puts in his heart, he puts in his spirit inside of us. So God is actually in us when we believe on Jesus. And so, so he's already inside of us. And so a lot of times what I'll get is an impression or I'll have a thought. And that thought will be, it will be just an idea, and what will happen is over time, I'll begin to see maybe like circumstances or some other things kind of confirm that thought or idea that I had was actually God. And but I think that's one of the biggest things is I used to struggle so much, and I used to pray really hard, especially when I was. One of the biggest ways that God has led me is through the desires of my heart. So he puts a desire in my heart to do something or desire, and then I do it, and I began to see him come alongside me and help me move in that direction. And so sometimes we don't know when God's speaking to us, but we get the confirmations afterwards. And I think over time of experiencing that more and more, I've become just a little bit better at kind of have an idea of when he might speak to me in the moment, when he might be speaking to me in the moment. But, another great way is through the word, through the Bible, spending time in the Bible.
Sure.
I listen to a lot of podcasts from different preachers, and so that, that's another way. But I really feel like everyone's walk with God is different. I feel like he speaks to different people different ways because he's wired our mind differently. He's wired my mind to operate a certain way, and so he knows how to speak to me. But I haven't always been great at discerning what that is. But I think that's the beautiful thing about a walk with God is he's not expecting us to be perfect listeners, or he's not expecting us to be perfect at discerning his voice. But I think over time, as you just by faith, so it's a thing that's the whole Christian life is something you can't see, right? So it's like one of those things where as you begin to walk and you begin to believe, you begin to experience him more and more. And I think you begin to be able to kind of understand how he speaks to you. but I don't think there's a manual that says like this is how God speaks to you. Because I don't think he's made anybody the same. I think he's created us all differently. And so there used to be a time where he used to just show me things and give me like a panoramic, not like a vision, but like he would line up things providentially and I would see something. I'd be like, God, I think God wants me to move in this direction. You know, there's like a number of conversations where people would bring things up or, you know, so things would happen. But I think over time it's been more of like God will give me a desire, something inside of me that I want to do that wasn't there before. I'll give you an example. I used to hate speaking in front of people. I mean, I didn't really have anything to say. 2008-ish maybe, and I would just, you know, we would have concerts and I would just play my songs back to back, and was really not good in front of people at all. Well, in 2008, around the same time, I was at my church, and this pastor just began to pray over me, and just said that he felt like God was going to begin to change me, and I was going to begin to speak, is what he said. To begin to speak more. And that our ministry events were going to be this organic time of like sharing and music, but it wasn't just going to be about the music. Well, I was like, you know, I thought I have no idea how this is going to happen because I just wasn't into it. I didn't like sharing in front of people. And well, that next year, I met this guy and we began to do a Bible study together. And it's when I began to understand more about what Jesus had done on the cross and everything that I've shared. And all of a sudden, it was like a switch turned on in my mind, and I couldn't stop sharing. I just had to share all the time about this. And that changed my entire ministry. And so it was a combination of, you know, a pastor at church praying over me and just sharing some things with me, and then God changing a desire in my heart. And so there was a time where God was speaking to me over a long, you know, series of months, and then kind of changed my heart and gave me the desire to do what he wanted me to do. And that's continued to this day. So God speaks in all kinds of creative ways. And I feel like there's no way to nail it down because he is so, I mean, he is the creative of all creatives. Like he created everything we see. And so I don't feel like God is, he's very non-robotic in how he communicates with people.
Absolutely.
So I don't know. It's a long answer to a short question.
No, that's great. That's what I was looking for, because I think what a lot of people that are looking at and exploring coming into the Christian walk look at it from the standpoint of what they believe this box is. What are the rules of the game? And as you said, you know, if we believe that God made us unique creations, creative in nature to our core. This is what we are. We are creators of the world around us as we perceive it, as we are, as we speak, as we tap into and allow that energy of the Spirit to flow through us out to the world around us. We are imbued and we are gifted this enormous responsibility to channel that power that God gave us. And it's an enormous responsibility that starts with understanding how unique and special we are as crafted by him and seen through his eyes. Looking in the mirror and being able to see ourselves as our Father Creator made us and intends us to be is such a powerful first step. And it's difficult. This gets me back to my next question regarding the very nature of addiction.
Yeah.
Again.
Hey, Sam, one sec, buddy.
Yeah, man. I'll go ahead and take a real quick. Hey, my name is Sam Matera. If you're just tuning in, you are watching the Kinetic. And this is my ministry of sorts, where we discuss coming through addiction issues through the power of Christ in our lives, the transformative power and the fire of the Holy Spirit in us. The Christian walk is represented here in all sorts of different ways. We have testimonies where people that have come through the addiction healing process and have recovered or are in the process of recovering, and they share their walk in faith with God, with our audience. We have pastors on that do teaching sessions with us, recovery specialists that come on and share their stories and offer up tips and guidance, all from a biblical and Christian perspective. Tonight, very special guest, Mr. Allan Scott, and you can check him out at allanscottmusic.com. We are thrilled that this incredibly talented young man is here to share his testimony. Very powerful. And I know, Allan, you probably got to get going here pretty soon. We've been on for over an hour now, but we have a lot of activity in the chat here. I don't know if you've looked at some of the comments, but you've got Andy Kendall, who comes on and says, Allan Scott gave me the hope to share my story. Laura Lyons Jones on here commenting on a regular basis throughout the show. Amen, amen, hallelujah. Thank you, Jesus, they're saying. Very nice. Stephanie Bennett comments that you and your wife are both amazing and inspirational people. So we want to thank everybody that's out there watching the show and commenting on the show. This will be a last opportunity for you. If you want to get a question into Allan, toss it in the comments or send me a private message. I'm on Facebook at Sam Atero. There you go. Look me up, hit me up, and like and subscribe to our content. We would appreciate the support. So, Allan, before we get going here, oh my gosh, she's so cute.
Hi, Bryn.
Hey there. Hi there. How are you, honey?
Getting ready for bed. And,
well, we'll let you get going. I wanted you to touch on real quick before you go, and this might be a little bit controversial. Answer it any way that you want to. Do you believe that addiction is a disease, Allan, or is it a state of being? In your estimation and where you came from, your opinion.
I think I don't get too hung up on it. Honestly, I don't think I know the question. I don't know the answer to that question.
Interesting.
I know what the solution is.
There you go.
I will say that in and of myself, without God, without Jesus in me, I tend to have an addictive personality. And I just anything that's bad for me is probably something that I'll crave at some point. Just as simple as I don't drink coffee just because it's bad for my singing voice, but I'll tell you what, I would love me a mean cup of coffee. I don't know if there's anything that's there that's hereditary or, but I don't have a problem when people call it a disease, and I don't have a problem when people call it, just a state of being, because I really think that in either case the solution is the same, and the solution is God, and it's also relationships with other people, and those are the two things. Having other people around you that can support you, that are maybe have walked through addiction, that can help you see blind spots and give you advice and be supportive, but also having the power of God in you, and giving you, changing you from the inside out. So whether it's a disease or not, I don't really know. I don't know the answer to that question, but I do think that there is a common solution, even if there's not a common diagnosis. I don't know if that makes sense, but
no, it does, and I kind of look at it from the standpoint of not a clinical dis-ease, but a dis-ease. Christ told us to rest in Him. All things have been done and provided for. We're not to worry. We're not to stress. And when we get in that mode of needing to fill a void, fill a hole for some unique purpose that is unique to us, we're really giving we're not ceding control over to God and to his will. We're trying to grasp that control back onto ourselves and exhibiting a lack of faith in the Creator. And I think that knowledge is deep inside of us, and we, for whatever reason, whether they're insecurities or, I mean, everybody comes to addiction from a different, for a different reason, for coming out of a different circumstance. It's unique to them. But ultimately what it boils down to, as you said, whether it's ingrained in our physical being or it's emblazoned in our DNA or not, ultimately it comes down to it's a dis-ease. We're not resting in the comfort and the security of that relationship with our Lord.
Amen, man. I agree with you.
Very good. Allan Scott, it's an honor to know you, sir. Look up allanscottmusic.com. Check him out on YouTube. Real quick before you go, tell us what's new on the music side of your life. We've talked about your spiritual walk. We've talked about your ministry. Tell us about your new releases, your tour. What do you got going on right now? And how can people learn more about Allan Scott?
Well, they can just go to our website, allanscottmusic.com. And but what we're doing right now is we connect with a lot of people on Facebook, our Facebook page. And you just type in Allan Scott. And that's a great way to connect with us, or Instagram. But right now we're in the middle of an album album release. And so we've been releasing one song at a time for a couple months now. And we have another song coming out here in about a week. And then we're going to release our album in July. And starting in July, we'll be doing a lot of touring and traveling around the Northeast, but around the country as well. And so we always love to meet people at our events. I love to hear stories from people. And but yeah, that's kind of what we're doing right now. Is just have created a new batch of music, and we're about to kind of throw it out there and see what people think. But so we're excited about it.
Well, you're an inspiration, Allan, and I really want to say again, thank you. I think we first made contact maybe 6 months ago, and we've been trying to make this happen, and I can't thank you enough. Hopefully, through the power of our Lord, we were able to reach into our cameras, reach out across the internet, and inspire some people, because it's, as you said, I mean, we've all fallen short of the glory, and if he can use the least of us in our worst state and pull us out of that and use us for his glory and change lives, if we've affected one life for the positive tonight, you know what? It was worth this time and this energy. God bless you. Everything that you're doing, your ministry, your music, your lovely family. Allan Scott, thank you so much for coming on the Kinetic tonight.
Hey, thanks for having me, Sam. I appreciate it.
My pleasure. Absolutely. And there we go. Another one in the books. Sam Matero coming to you live from my humble little studio in beautiful Clearfield County, north central Pennsylvania, located in Treasure Lake, just outside of Du Bois, PA. And some pretty exciting things coming up. I'm going to be, if you watched the show last week, partnering with Pastor Willie Maldonado from WillieMaldonadoWorldMinistries.org. Good friend of mine, counselor and pastor from Chicago, Illinois. He is going to be coming on the show on a regular basis to share practical applications of biblical principles in dealing with the stresses and the mechanics of everyday life that can sometimes lead us down the wrong path when we are entering into or navigating through that state of dis-ease, as we said. So remember, rest easy in the knowledge that the Lord is with you, God is with you, Christ is with you, in you, period. My name's Sam Matero, coming to you live on the Kinetic. Thank you so much for watching. Allan Scott, God bless you. And we'll see you next time around. Peace to you all.